to our panel on editing action. Moderating today's discussion is Avid's own Matt Fury. Please welcome our panelists: Zine Baker, ACE, Dodie Dorn, ACE, Michael McCusker, ACE, Evan Schiff, ACE, and Terilyn A. Shropshire, ACE. Let's toss it to Matt.
Thank you all for coming this morning. We're here to talk about action editing. The reason we're here to talk about action editing is because the good people of ACE called me up and said, "Hey, Motormouth, you want to do a panel at EditFest?" And I said, "Sure." And they said, "Great, what do you want it to be about?" And I said, "Action editing." And they said, "Excellent, we'll see you in 2 months." And I hung up the phone. I thought, what the hell does that mean? I don't know what action editing is, and so I figured I'm going to show up here today, and if you didn't know it already, you're going to figure out, I don't know what I'm talking about. So how do I get around that? Well, I do what I always do. I sit next to people who know what they're talking about, and that's who we have here today. Some delightfully wonderful, happy, smile, McCusker, will you? Jesus. Some very talented people who each of whom I called and said, "Hey, you want to be on this action editing panel?" And they all said the same thing. What does that mean? So together we're going to try and figure that out. There's a lot of ways I could screw up this panel today. One of them that I don't want to happen is to not get to everybody's clip. So I think we're going to jump into that as soon as possible so we can see all of your great work. But I did want to start off by talking about just that moniker, action editor. I don't think any of you consider yourselves, well, I'm an action editor. I think you have an affinity and a talent for all kinds of different types of storytelling, and one of them is action editing. That said, when you're doing an action film, do you prep for it any differently? Do you approach it any differently than you would something that's a more straight-ahead, narrative, dialogue-driven kind of film?
Well, I think the process actually sort of dictates it, particularly the modern process with all of the previs and whatnot. So, I mean, you just, I'm dealing with it on the movie I'm working on right now. When I did Ford Ferrari, I effectively cut that final race twice because I cut it entirely in previs and then cut it when the footage came in. So I guess in a weird way, in pre-production, you're already kind of setting up what your basis of organization is because you're seeing what it's going to be. I was talking to somebody about it just last night, and it's like, I can't imagine that they made Raiders of the Lost Ark without previs. It's like it's such a big part of what we do, and it's why it's so important for an editor to be involved early, because that's, we can see what's coming, we can see if it's going to work, and we can actually keep track. We're sort of the hive mind of the movie when to start shooting, but when you're doing so much of it in the beginning, you kind of have to start that hive mind earlier.
So sometimes you're at the mercy of just the production schedule and the way things are just going to work. But with a film with big action set pieces, is it a best practice to try and tackle those first? Is it just something that doesn't matter? Because you have so much context to set up for those set pieces. But those seem like they'd be a simpler thing to do. Just all right, how do we set up, like, all right, this is the race that's coming up and we got to do this race, or this is the battle that's coming up. Do you, within post itself, do you actually look at it like, well, I've got to do set piece number 1 first, and then I can worry about some of the more narrative stuff later?
I find for me, it's dictated by what they're shooting. So if there's a scene where, I know that first unit's going first and second unit's following behind right away, and that's usually what's going to dictate what I hit first. And it also can have to do sometimes with the visual effects schedule and what they're going to be asking for first. So it's sometimes a negotiation in terms of working with the director and kind of talking about what they want, well, certainly during production, I find myself really chasing production, what they're shooting, what they're about to shoot, what do I need to prep them for, what do I need to give to second unit that first unit did, so that they have the right information. I think once I get into post, a lot of the scenes that we'll decide to tackle after I've given them the first cut or heard the first cut is kind of what visual effects is saying they may need to start working on first.
Does it change at all how you crew? Like if you're doing an action film, you look at it like, well, I need an assistant that's got some chops doing action movies, or is it, again, just a good assistant is a good assistant?
I look for the best assistant who's great at what they do, great at storytelling, great at making my ability to do what I'm doing easier. Someone who can really run the room, communicate well. I don't shift my requirements based on the genre that I'm working in.
When you're doing an intense action sequence, do you look at it like, well, the audience is really, the editing, you don't often want them to notice the editing. You want the story to work. But in an action sequence, often the audience is cognizant of the editing. When you're doing those sequences, are you aware of that? Are you thinking like, what I'm doing here is really, I'm taking a solo in a way, and that the audience is really going to notice my work here? You want to answer that. Zine, you tilted your head. Answer it.
It's tricky because you do want to stay out of the way. I can't really say you want to put your own stamp on it. There's a lot of action stuff that to me is like a dialogue scene. It's a question and an answer, and so it's a fist and a block or whatever. So it's like a dialogue scene to me, and I usually, I almost cut everything with no sound. I cut dialogue stuff with no sound. So same thing goes for the action stuff. So it's what you're kind of reading off of the footage is, even in a fight scene, is a lot of subtext for me. And if that's grabbing the story, then that's a 2-for-1 deal.
If you're fortunate to get really high quality action footage, for me, I'm thinking of like hand-to-hand combat footage where the actors have prepared, a lot of prep work has gone in before they actually show up on the shoot day. Then it's your responsibility to allow them to showcase that and to not get in the way. And I feel like sometimes when you have lower quality footage, that's when you need to step in a little bit, because you can't just let them hang out on screen and be embarrassed at the low quality of what you have. But if you have it, like if you actually have good footage, I think that it's your responsibility to make sure that everybody can see, all the work and all the prep and all the value that the other departments have put into everything.
Flip side of that.
Yeah.
What if your footage is shit?
Well, that's what I was saying. If your footage is shit, then then if you hang on it, you risk embarrassing your actors and embarrassing your director, and so then you need to take more drastic steps
to make them better.
To make it better, to pace it up, to cut things out.
I've done a lot of stuff with, not recently, but early on.
Yes, I think most of us have.
Where that's the real trick is like, what am I going to do with this? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I'd asked about, does your approach change? Does the schedule change? Or does it dictate that you are on the film earlier than you might usually be because of things like stunt viz or any of those other viz processes?
Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
I think we should be.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whether other people who pay bills think we should be is the trick, but I think we should be.
Good point. I'm not going to follow that any further. I said I didn't want to screw up by not getting to the clips soon enough, so I think we should do that. Zine, alphabetically, sorry.
Sure.
You're up first, although it's funny, Zine, B. Tell us about the clip that you brought today. Just do the setup. We'll dissect it afterwards.
Okay.
Just what are we about to watch?
It's a clip from the interview, so I figured I'd do something a little different, maybe than expected. So surprise. It's a camera room fight. The characters involved. It's during the interview. The actual Franco character interviewing Kim Jong-il character, Randall Park. Seth's character, Aaron, is in the control room. There's a kill switch button that if the interview, the setup for the clip is if the interview starts to go in the direction that Kim or North Korea doesn't want it to go, kill switch and the interview's over. So Aaron and his accomplice in the control room have taken control, trying to protect the, keep away from the button, basically.
Gotcha.
That's in a nutshell. There's a lot more going on, but
that's for after.
That's the basics.
Okay. Yes.
Oh, and Seth's character is very protective of his camera angles.
Good to know. All right.
I don't think it's offensive. I think it's super important. Obviously, if you don't want to answer these questions, you can just get up and walk away. I can't keep you from retreating.
Hi, Zine. All right. Edit Fest has started. Okay, so.
I thought that was going to be much, much better. I'm just kidding.
Please. Well, why that one? What made you pick that clip? Yeah, defend yourself.
All right, why that one? I don't know. I wanted to go with something different. It's because action can be so many different things, and there's so much going. You know, everybody thinks of action as you know, car chase, fight. This one to me is all of that, plus you have to make it funny. So how do you do that? You know, and then I don't know how he did that, but hopefully it obviously worked because the crowd's in it. So and the other thing is, like, my thought was I'm either going to lose this crowd immediately or they'll be in it. And so thankfully it works.
Yeah, I think it did.
That's why I chose it.
No, good choice.
Like,
You know, watching that clip, what it reminded me of is that for a lot of sequences, the action begins before the action begins. You do have sort of a ramp up to things.
Right.
So how do you approach that in terms of like setting the tempo before the action actually starts?
Explain that a little
I
bit.
can't. That's why you're here. You missed the whole part at the beginning where I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. No, that you actually, with music, with cutting, like the tempo starts to build before the action goes.
A little bit, yeah. I mean, there's that overhanging suspense of, you know, are they going to get to the button? The ultimate goal there. It sounds lame to say that there's something that's organic to me when you get to that point. And I'll do credit, Evan Hinke. I don't know if you're here, Evan. Evan Hinke was co-editor on this. So. Yeah, it's just a feel, and you want to balance out the so much story to it. The interview story, the control room story, the general story that you saw, like he's controlling everything from behind. It's all converging. So yeah, I don't know.
Because there's so much, as you said, there's so much story to it. Are there building blocks that you use as sort of the tent poles throughout that scene where you think, right, I'm going to lay down this part, then this part, then this part.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, you know, it sounds reductive, but filling the gaps.
Pretty much, yeah. You're like what I did for the interviews is I kept it rolling on. We made a little picture-in-picture during it, so I could kind of tune in and out of it. It's kind of weird because we shot the interview completely separate. With the idea, there was just a loose idea. It wasn't exactly meticulously planned that. We would intercut with the control room. Nobody knew exactly where, but the interview itself had its own rise and fall and turn, twist, where Franco gets the upper hand. First, Kim gets the upper hand. So we had a little picture. I just kept it picture in picture the whole time, so I could see, like, okay, this is a good spot here to go in control room. Now back out to interview, back into control room, build it that way, cut out the more uninteresting parts of the interview, get the subtext as quickly and clearly as you can, and move on to the next beat. Like I feel like if you're not, well, what is the next new piece of information? You know, all right, here's the turn, there's the subtext, I see it. Hopefully everybody else can see the change in the actor's performance. Move to the fight. Aaron wants his angles. He doesn't want anybody to get the button, and it just kind of goes from there.
So that picture-in-picture approach to the intercutting, is that something that was unique to that scene that you used that, or is that something you might use in a lot of different intercutting scenarios?
I've kind of learned to use it in internet. It was first for that because I was like, there's no other way to keep track of it because the interview footage alone was 30 hours.
Sorry.
So, it was basically, that was the first thing we had to do, was cut that together in its most basic form. Here is the interview with all of the questions, because, it was very long. And with its own build, and that, our first cut was, massive too long for anyone to want to sit through. It was 4 hours something, But but you really had no choice. We had no choice. We had to see what we had. So once that was done, then picking and choosing where to go in and out, cutting the interview down to its most basic form.
Well, part of the gag is the actions taking place in the control room are impacting the camera angles. You're protecting the angle. So stuff's going on. The monitors are changing. That's something.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Should I stop asking and you can just take it from there?
I mean, all those pieces, the different angles, those were separate picture-in-picture elements because we needed to fill the control room monitors. So which pieces worked best in there? The star wipe. I have to give credit to Michael Weber on that one. If you go back, there's a star wipe in almost every single one of my movies.
The signature thing. Yeah, that's we know it's you.
Little Easter egg.
Every editor should do that. That's nice.
Star wipe. Great.
Okay, nice work. I'm glad we started off with that one because I'm glad we started off with that one.
Okay.
Dodie.
Yes, sir.
What are we going to be looking at?
I don't know. There are two clips.
There are two clips.
Which one? Yeah.
I'm going to guess Army of the Dead is first.
Okay.
That's a guess, but...
Exactly what you described, high-octane fight. Yes. In a casino with a bunch of zombies.
I'm in. All right, if it's not that, what's the other one?
Point of view fight in a small apartment with a couple of cops and...
What's that movie?
That's End of Watch.
End of Watch. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, this is fun.
Oh, the other one, Army of the Dead is the casino one.
Right.
With the zombies.
We'll see what we get.
Hence Army of the Dead.
Yes.
Yeah,
that's
Army
exciting.
Of the Dead. Yeah.
All right, so that was End of Watch, right?
Did I edit that? I'm not sure I edited that. No, I did.
I know that feeling.
It's going to make the next 10 minutes awfully tough.
Yeah.
I didn't know you did. So you've worked with Zach for a while now. Where does a scene like that begin? Like, what are the basic building blocks of something like that?
Well, I like what Evan said about protecting the actors. Actually, almost all of that stunt work was done by the actors, but there are a couple places that are stunties, and you're really trying to make it be as seamless as possible so you don't ever know that it's not the person. And Zach has a very robust team of people who do the stunt work in advance. Sometimes they do their own little mock-ups. They'll video themselves and they give the mock-ups to me. It's very detailed. It's very, very detailed. And then, of course, I just get it all and do what I want. Which is obviously very cause and effect based. And it is, like you were saying, a conversation. It's a conversation. And searching for some amount of emotion, if you can get some in there, with all that, with all those guns going off.
Well, some of that emotion obviously will come from the score. What is your approach? Is it I like to edit a scene like that without music, and then?
Yeah, I usually edit without music. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll add it. Once I'm like Terry, I'm cutting right away, and I don't cut in order of what I think is most important. I just cut. And if they have got their second unit coming up, sure, I'll provide for them, what I've done. I also will give scenes to Zach as often as he wants. So he sees a lot of material during shooting. Something really interesting, I love to tell people about this on Army of the Dead. The first time in my life, I did not give a shot missing list to a director. Not one shot missing list. And there was one scene that I cut where I thought, I could really use a close-up, an insert of this thing where he's putting a key card into a lock. And I thought, but he said he didn't want to do any inserts, so I can tell what's happening. I gave him the scene. 3 days later, that insert showed up. I'm not joking. And I didn't put in a card for shot missing or anything. So he's pretty aware of what he's shooting, and I'm getting the goods, like you said. Really getting the goods is really fun material to work with. And then he has it in his mind, all those things like the blood hitting the lens and that kind of thing. That's all Zach.
Yeah, it sounds like he's very meticulous in a great way. How does that affect the timing of it, the speed ramps? I mean, and this is the first clip we've looked at where you have some slow-mo stuff going on. Is that something that's very well thought out ahead of time, or are you playing with that in editorial?
No, I'm playing with it, but he does a lot. He shoots a lot at 60 or 120 or 90, and I have the opportunity to do the ramps. And it's also, I think, I don't have star wipes as my signature, but Zach has speed ramps as his signature. If I have a signature, by the way, and I don't know if you're going to wait till the end to show my second clip, is that I do like very visible editing. I don't think that invisible editing, for me, is really that important. I think it's much more important that you are pulling the audience along with the story, and hopefully that it's emotional. To me, everything is about it being emotional. So,
like, story kind of dictates the editing.
Kinda, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
I think we're done.
Definitely.
No, I didn't ask this at the beginning. Doing an action sequence, do you feel like you get noticed more for your work when you're doing an action sequence? It's sort of an inverse of the question I did ask at the beginning about how you're cognizant of it. But I was talking to an editor recently who does a lot of action movies, and he said, I feel like editors get more credit for action movies because, again, it's really in your face, and it's harder to be noticed for something that is a little more dialogue driven.
I think that really an editor gets noticed for great filmmaking. That's when they get noticed, when people are engaged by the film and they want to see it over and over again. I think, yes, there is a certain amount of something tricky kind of getting people's attention, but it doesn't mean anything unless it's cloaked in something that has, wowed audiences and makes them want to go back to it, actually.
I once had an editor when I was coming up who said to me a really great piece of advice, which was, great drama takes a lot longer to cut than action. It was her.
True. Oh. Oh, embarrassing.
Oh, that's our moment today, McCusker. We'll remember this edit fest
I
forever.
actually think about that all the time.
But
I do all the time think about that.
Well, is that in general, in doing a scene, I'll ask all the time, like, was it harder to do a dialogue, a table scene where an emotional thing, or people sitting around a table versus a giant set piece, or is it just...
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, I agree.
Because of those emotional beats are harder to get right, or what is it? Why is it harder?
It's more subtle, for sure. Like I just said, the cause and effect of it. Like, I'm not going to wait too long before I cut to the zombie head exploding. You
need 2 more frames to do what I was telling you.
Yeah, but how long you linger on someone speaking or even hearing somebody else speaks volumes more than that.
That's all. And there's a subjective thing to it as well when you're watching it with, say, the director, like your taste in where that turn happens could be in perfect line or it could be slightly different. And then the producers have their opinion on that, and
all that.
Well, it feels like every scene you do has a trajectory, right? And we're always modulating what that trajectory is, whether it's an action scene or whether it's a drama. And I think we can have all experience. We've had scenes where people, are at a table, and there's something that has to happen within that moment in time at that table. And you may have 16 people at a table, which can be incredibly difficult to shoot and incredibly difficult to edit, and can take as long as any action scene that you do. I think that, often when you're editing action, it's almost like it's considered like a sexier editing. But I really do think that I can be as enthralled, in the dynamic of a drama scene or a comedy scene. Like even what you were doing there, it's really about modulating that dynamic and in service of the story. And I think that I think it's unfortunate that certain films don't necessarily get noticed as much as perhaps an action scene would, just because there may be more subtlety to it, or it's kind of people's perception of what good editing is.
So within an action film, a lot of the groundwork that makes the action scene so engaging comes from the dialogue scenes that precede it. All of that setup matters. And I mean, we've all seen movies where there's just a lot of action that looks very expensive, but you tune out because it doesn't mean anything. Action is story. It's the furtherance of the story that you've already set up. And so you have to, in an action film, combine, interesting dialogue scenes with your action. Otherwise, your action becomes boring because it doesn't mean anything.
Well, aside from what the audience thinks, doing those big set pieces, is it more scrutiny, more notes, more discussion, more pain in making changes because of, we spent a lot of money on this. We got to find it. You can't lose this or cut it down. I know what it costs us to do this.
I don't find that. No. If
in
it works,
action, do you
works.
think? Are you asking like from the outside of the cutting room?
Producers, no, I'm not from the outside, but during production.
Yeah, no, I mean, outside of us.
Oh, sorry.
I think it's the opposite. A lot of times they want it shorter.
Right.
I did get one note on John Wick 3, which I still enjoy, which was they went deep into the Moroccan desert with a helicopter. They went to great pains to bring this helicopter out, and it was for when John Wick is returning from Morocco to New York, and they had the whole thing took about 45 seconds for a Keanu double to walk to the helicopter, get in the helicopter, and then I tried to shorten it as much as possible, but it still took quite a bit of time of just shoe leather, including helicopter shoe leather, of having this thing take off and fly away. And the studio was pressuring us intensely to get the running time down, and they were willing to cut pretty much anything. And I finally was like, why do we have this? Like, everybody knows, nobody really understands how John Wick gets around the world, and seeing him get on a helicopter is not going to help that in any way. So we cut that out, and the next day, where'd the helicopter shot go? We liked that. Like, that's 45 seconds of no story really being told, and it stayed out. There was no argument for putting it back in, but they were precious about it.
Makes sense to me.
Scope and scale.
Yeah. Well, let's now that we know what the other clip is going to be, do you want to do a little more? So this is just a fight scene.
Well, I think it's because it's POV. That is one of the ones where the editing is really kind of in your face, because the camera is kind of in your face in a sense. So it's just a fun piece, I think. But I don't have that much. I think it sort of speaks for itself.
All right. Well, let's let it speak for itself. So here's end of watch.
Shit. Oh no! She did ask for your help around the house? That's incredible. Outrageous.
Hey, just because I look like the dudes from Home Depot doesn't mean I do the shit the Home Depot dudes do.
Nicely done, Dodie. So first, if you're wondering why Dodie has 2 clips, the email I got back was, you want Dodie Dorn 2-clip minimum. So
Liar.
it just worked out that way, but I'm glad it did, because that was a really fun scene. All right, Dodie, so again, what was it about that scene that you thought you really wanted to share this with the audience?
I need the lead-in. Explain myself.
Explain yourself. It was just a little bit of confusion around the clips here, but again, good thing we got
Yeah,
this.
I think that the reason why I like this clip, and by the way, I didn't pick either of the clips. My post-PA picked the clips. My nephew, by the way, Dresden Dorn. So he picked the clips, and I said, okay. And I thought it was a pretty interesting choice, because it's a lot of jump cutting, continuity is meaningless, it's just energy and humor and drama, and it's just fun. It's a fun little piece. So that's why.
It is a fun little piece. And now that we've had that, McCusker's going to do nothing but swear the rest of the thing because
Exactly.
the other gates are open.
Well, also, this was the kind of getting this kind of material is where you're kind of, it's like a salad almost. You know, you're throwing it together and then you watch it over and over again and just see what works. Because it was, a lot of the entire film was POV, almost until the very end, but was POV, and the director had done a lot of improv with the actors, riding around with them for really months at a time. So they didn't really have a script, they just had scenarios. And so that little tete-a-tete in the beginning was not a scripted bit. It was a scenario that he would, when they were shooting, he would ride in the back and just toss the scenario out to them. And they were using GoPros and all sorts of other weird cameras. And a lot of times he'd say, I know I shot this thing. And we'd have to go back to Photochem and say, yes, we know there are no slates, but it's there. We promise you. And it was very hard to get all the material. And then the way that it was organized was kind of tricky because we just had to watch everything. And it was not, you know, line script. It's also, this is one of those films where I sometimes tell people that I cut the dialogue and then I splashed images on it. Because the dialogue was all there in the radio mics, and that was really what was kind of driving the rhythm and the drama, and then I just needed to put images that kind of worked with it. It wasn't necessarily the same image that was from that dialogue at all. So, and it was just really fun. It was very fun to play with.
I thought the opening part of that fight, those
in the car.
No, inside with like when you come inside and you're just seeing like the torso of the guy and not his face, it's really threatening. It just really got me like stressed. It was just a really interesting choice to just stay on his torso.
Well, yeah. Also, I love that it's all about the fact that he got his mail from somebody who, I mean, it's like really small-time cop problems, really small. So he'd been drinking and he got his mail out of somebody else's mailbox or something like that. It didn't really matter what the infraction was. It was just tiny. So.
Well, for all of you, is it liberating to have that kind of loosely structured, highly improv material, handheld stuff, POV stuff, in that you can kind of pretty much go anywhere, or is it a little easier if you have something that is really rigid in how it's planned out and how it's executed?
You used the E word, easy.
Easy?
What? We don't do anything because it's easy. Yeah. We do it because it's fun. Or, I'm sorry,
no,
am I speaking?
No, I agree. It's just, the only thing that stresses me out is time.
Yeah.
Time. It's just time. It's, I think we could all spend a lot more time. We go back and cut stuff we've cut. It's just we have to, but we work in a business, so.
So it's funny you say that, because as we were mingling out in the hall and talking about everybody prepping for this, I think more than a few of you said, I hadn't seen that film in a while. I had to go back and look at that scene to refresh my memory. When you go back and you've put some distance between yourself and the work, and you go back and look at it again, are you still editing in your head like, if I had more time, I might do this a little differently?
Yes.
Totally. Yeah.
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 I notice if I see something that I edited early in my career, there's a little bit of naivete in my style.
How would you define that? Or can you define
It's just not landing as well as it could. I mean, you just learn over time by practicing and by doing, and you get better.
Memento's pretty good.
Oh, thank you.
Just saying. Okay, Mr. McCusker.
Yes.
You edit from time to time.
Yes, I do.
We have a clip for you.
Yes.
What clip did you bring with us today?
Deadpool.
Deadpool 2.
Yep. That's it. That's all I'm going to say.
That's all you're going to say? All right. That's all he's going to say. Here's a scene from Deadpool 2. Michael McCusker.
Oh, shit. It's Cable, 12 o'clock.
Okay, new plan! Use all of your imaginary powers to stop Cable from killing that kid!
All right, Mike. Well, you were the guy that said, I wish I had more time. Here's the punchline. How long did that take to edit?
Well, I want to just say, first of all, that's how you use Enya. Definitely use Enya in an action scene. So.
Did you pick Enya?
No, I didn't, but I love Enya, and I still listen to Enya. So I was very, very happy to work on that part of it. It was great. It was like, you know, that was a Ryan thing. He wanted Enya. So no, I came onto that movie. That's all I cut, and I was on 8 months, 10 months, 10 months. So that's version 57, I think, of that sequence. And, you know, the reason why I picked it was that, you know, the best laid plans, right? Every production goes into, it's kind of like going to war. You have a battle plan, you go in, you want to shoot it, you want to get it all right. And that was a sequence that went wrong early on. There was a kind of a tragic loss of a stuntman early on, and it like messed up the whole sequence and schedule. So they had a lot of like what I like to call J-bod, just a bunch of dailies. They didn't get through the schedule. So we had to figure out a way to like put it together, and that kept changing. And the thing that was really interesting, it was challenging, but it was also like really fun, was that like as much as Ryan is a creative in his own way, it's matched by David Leitch. So, and oftentimes they'd be working, you know, they work in different realms, but they're both as creative. I mean, David Leitch is just a great physical action director. I mean, he's just the bits in there, they're fun and they're really aggressive. I mean, he's the guy who jumped through the window in Chris's movie, in one of the Bourne movies. So what was happening during that time was there was a whole other movie being done with 3 other editors. And I took that piece and worked on it and worked it and worked it and worked it. And every time I got to a place that was great, like Dave would come in and come up with new action ideas. And then we'd work it all out and everything, and then Ryan would go like, yeah, now let's put some dialogue on it, which would unwind the action. So when you're talking about like how action and dialogue work, it was like he'd start cooking up new lines. And they were really funny lines, so it was always this, like, it was constantly changing. And I'd walk into work every day, and the days that I walked into work and I didn't see the storyboard artist there, I knew I was okay. But it was like the days, more days than not, over that 8 months, there was a storyboard artist in there, like, reconceiving stuff. Either stunts, or I had, you know, when I would, the sort of equal part of that was the days I walked in and saw the writers working with Ryan. And it was like, oh God. So it never ended. it was like, I thought I was going to get more to get into other parts of the film, and I never did. That's what I did for a long time. So, and that's not even the whole sequence. I mean, the sequence is actually another couple minutes longer. So, but it was, I hadn't looked at it in a while, and it was like, oh, it's kind of crazy. It's all over the place. And you can kind of see, I mean, some of what I'm doing there is really, you know, it's being held together with this crosstalk between him and Domino. That's the kind of glue that's holding together what, if you were to take that off, it's like, it feels like disparate parts, but it holds together. I mean, and then in the midst of all this, when we finally decided, okay, we have a sequence that we like, the studio said, you know, we want Deadpool to fight Cable, because in the original sequence, they never fought on that vehicle. So it was like late in the game, and they're like, we want this. And it was like, okay, let's throw it all up in the air again and do it again. So it was crazy. It was just a...
I think this is a question that I could ask each one of you about cutting action. That is, so what did it say in the script? And the joke would be like, nothing. You know, just they go into the casino and shoot everybody.
Right.
I kind of thought maybe you had it a little easier because of that dialogue that was in there. Now hearing that...
No, that was always changing.
So when did you said just a bunch of dailies?
Yeah, well, you know, the stuff that was on top of the Caravan and all the stuff that, they locked down Vancouver and shot the Caravan, but they could only do that for a few days. And then that early on in that production period is when they they lost the crew member. So they didn't get through everything. And then they had to kind of put everything on hold. And so they didn't get through a lot of the stuff that was even processed. It kind of messed up the schedule. So it was just constantly evolving. It was a constantly evolving sequence. It was like underneath my feet as I'm like, I caught up, I got it, it's locked. Nope, not locked, not done, not locked. It wasn't locked till the very, very end. So.
Well, something we haven't talked about yet is just organization. How you begin to, if you've got just a bunch of dailies or you've got a script that doesn't say much, how do you start organizing these elements so that it's a little, I don't mean to use the word sorry, not easy. How I think it's more fun to edit these very complex sequences.
No E words.
No, sorry, it's never easy. Never.
You know, I don't know. I think being an assistant and having to break down really in really complicated scenes. Sometimes I've worked on a couple of movies where, like, the entire third act is one scene number, and it's like, okay, well, how do you actually present that to an editor every day? So I just started coming up with, when I was an assistant, I came up with strategies to break things down, and I, what I learned was to really talk to the script supervisor, because they've got to break it down too. So they're going to break down the beats, and that's what everybody's going to refer to. That's the unifying structure when you come into the room, is what they were talking about on the set. If it's like 3 lines, but they've got a beat sheet, more and more I'm getting beat sheets, which is great. But back in the day, sometimes you just get like 3 lines, like just like dozens of lines on it to try to get through it. But getting in touch with the script supervisor and saying, okay, what are the beats? What did you break it down into other beats? And I've always said the most important thing I can get from a script supervisor is intention on the set. Like, what were they intending to try to achieve? And then the second most important is where did they fail? Like, they couldn't. Because then I know whether I'm chasing something if I'm chasing intent and I'm looking for intent they got, I can try to get them what they want. But if something went awry that day, then I know that I've got to figure it out. So, and not spend a lot of time trying to solve a puzzle that's not solvable. So.
In those 56 prior sequences, 56, were you trying to sell different things? I mean, was it just iterations of getting to that point, or were there different takes on how to do that scene?
Well, it was what I said. There was new ideas for stunts, or there was new dialogue coming in. And so it would change and you'd have to run through it, put it all out, lay it out, and then the studio had to pay for it, so they had to take a look at it too, so they were chiming in. So it was just, it was just quicksand a little bit, but,
I had asked all of you about your approach, or excuse me, what you look for in an assistant, and if you change your needs for an assistant based on the type of project you're doing. Obviously, you get an assistant that's working, you're going to stick with them. What you ask of them during the film, is that any different on the amount of action in your film?
Not for my first. Not for the person who's my first. I do look for somebody who's good with sound, because I did a lot of that when I was coming up. It was really important. But as movies get into the realm, more and more into the realm of unreal, there's only so much you can achieve in the cutting room. It's like, when you're talking about aliens or portals or weird shit, you can have somebody work up a fight like that. But when there's a ton of design work, that's when it gets tricky. And I was just asking Dodi before we came on stage, like, when are you bringing on sound crew? Because I like to bring them on as early as possible if I have anything to say about it. Because the movies are getting so complex, there's only so much that you can get through in a day or in a schedule even for an assistant. So,
will you lean more into doing sound design in those kind of scenes, or do you look at it like, well, I'm going to bring the sound crew in earlier, I'm going to assign more of this to my assistants? Or is it incumbent upon you to do that?
It's a combination. It's a combination. Like, if it's a pretty straightforward scene that's punching and guns and stuff that you can find in libraries, then fine. But if there's something that you're looking for unique sounds, then it's like I try to go to the studio and said, this is not. We got to bring somebody in. We got at least bringing somebody who's just dedicated to throwing ideas at us for these ideas or these sequences.
You mentioned the Unreal Engine and that technology, that the volume and things like that. For the stuff that Dodi showed, and for you, Zine, obviously not a lot of big visual effects. Well, it's debatable. But then the Deadpool 2 thing, ton of green screen.
Yes.
Is it that much harder for you to work on something that is so much virtual and waiting for visual effects?
Well, not in that case, because the actors were there. It's harder when you're imagining the whole character or characters. I'm doing Venom 3, and there's Venom and a bunch of other aliens in it. And we're going to I'm going to be sitting there with 2 actors, and they're going to be reacting. And it's trying to figure out the timing on that takes a lot. That takes some time.
Put anything to act against?
Sometimes, when I did the Wolverine, we put a guy on stilts with a thing sticking off his head, so the eye lines were high enough for, so you're looking up because the thing's supposed to be big. Which is really hard to cut because you're like, I have to imagine it and not imagine it there at the same time. It's like, I can't, it's like, I have to you're messing with your brain all the time. And it causes you to watch it and watch it and watch it again. Because it's like, am I giving too much? Is this playing? I don't know. And then you get the stuff in, and of course, then there's, I know people who do the Apes movies. That's just the same thing. It's like, you just have to, it's constantly changing.
Evan.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
You ready to talk about action editing?
Sure.
Did you bring a clip?
I did bring a clip.
It'll make it better.
Yeah.
Okay. What are we going to watch?
Now I'm having regrets. I should have brought the clip with the dogs, but I did not. I brought the knife fight from John Wick 3.
That's pretty much all you need to say. It's a knife fight in John Wick 3.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the things to keep in mind as you're watching it is there is no real glass and very few actual knives.
And these are really bad people that he's fighting.
I mean, people are chasing John Wick, and that's,
Shouldn't
truism
for
for most scenes in the movie. So I think that's all I need to say.
All right. Well, let's take a look at John Wick 2.
And scene. Short and sweet.
Whatevers.
What's that?
Whatevers.
Yeah, exactly.
It's crazy. That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean that's the the absurdity of John Wick. It's just getting a scene like that. But that one was really fun. We got that early on, and there was supposed to be actually even more to the fight, but we were already behind schedule when we were like 5 days into the shoot. But that one, again, yeah, there were no actual knives. So the assistants in New York, John and Nick, used clip art knives that we just, took from Google and from probably Microsoft Word. And so the first version of that scene, yeah, had glass sound effects, but no actual glass because that would be really hard to temp. And then just these clip art knives that we keyframed.
You should have brought that.
What's that?
You should have brought that.
Yeah, I know. I wish I had that still. Actually, I might. I have to look if I have that. But we put it together, and then the biggest challenge with that was actually lengthening it. And so those, Keanu and the stunt guys, and there's some really famous martial artists in that sequence. They move so fast that you actually need to kind of draw it out a little bit so that the audience can track what is happening. There's a section in there that we call the snowball fight that is the same exact beats from 180-degree angles played in sequentially. So if you're looking, you can actually see we're just repeating the same section over and over again from a different angle. And then you get towards the end, and there's a 17-second shot of Keanu with the two hatchet guys, and I was not going to get in the way of that. So, yeah.
So for a film like John Wick, where the director is somebody that's from the world of stunt making, how is that different? Like, how is the direction different when the director is that embedded in that world?
Yeah. So when I go on set, I see him like interacting with the stunt guys and Keanu and being like, okay, move out of the way. Let me show you how this move works, which is not something that you see a lot of directors, do. He generally does not come in and look at the cuts of action scenes. He's done it so long. He started off as Keanu's stunt double in The Matrix, and then a stunt coordinator and choreographer and second unit director, and then now obviously main unit director. He is very confident in the action footage that he shoots, and he knows whether he got it or he didn't. It's the other stuff, the dialogue scenes, those we spend a lot more time tweaking and and making sure those are right, and those are the ones I make sure to bring him on set so that he can see how things are shaping up. But with that one, I put the assembly together with the clip art knives, and then we brought in the second unit director and some of the stunt guys to watch it. And at that point, it was very, very rough. But even then, you could just see it was going to be fun and funny and absurd. And so it turned out pretty much exactly as we intended. And the biggest thing was just, you know, making sure, even with the shots of like Keanu realizing that he's found himself in an antique warehouse full of knives, you know, like that, even just drawing that moment out was just important so that you made sure that that the humor comes through in addition to the action.
And it wasn't a very cutty sequence. I mean, you stay in wides a lot.
Yeah.
And the pacing of the, I mean, if you really just looked at it on the timeline, the cutting isn't that rapid. You're really giving the audience a time to absorb everything that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of gets to what I was going earlier, which is that, you know, they do, most movies will maybe do a few weeks of prep with their actors. You know, John Wick movies do 6 months. They have the camera guys attend the stunt rehearsals so that they understand, you know, where the actors are going to be moving and where the stunt guys are going to be moving as they're performing the scene. A lot of the rehearsal, and there's still a lot that is actually worked out on the day when they get to the physical location and they realize, oh, there's a column here that there wasn't in our stunt rehearsal space, so we have to readjust, you know, how we're going to do these moves. But they generally have an idea of what they're going to do going in, and then when they get there, they work out the fine details. And because during their prep, for example, they've taught Keanu or Halle Berry or whoever's, you know, in the scene, they've taught them jujitsu rather than teaching them moves. Then you can get to the location and you can change what that choreography is, and the actors don't get freaked out about it because they are ready for that and they're prepared for that. They're not just repeating a set of, you know, commands that they've been trained to do blindly. They know what the martial art is, and so they can adapt.
That's cool.
Yeah. I thought it was really interesting there was no music in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I mean, so really the sound effects are kind of creating a rhythm.
Yeah. We do that a lot in the John Wick films. I think part of it is it's fun hearing a lot of those efforts are the stunt guys' actual efforts.
Mm-hmm. So it's a lot of production audio in there?
There's a lot of production audio in there. You know, in John Wick 2, there's a stair fall in John Wick 2, which is supposed to be Common and Keanu, and it's 2 stunt guys. And you can hear one of them say, "Come here, fucker," and then they go down the stairs. And we just thought that was hilarious, so we left that in. Yeah, I mean, I think that like the action is so engaging, and the choreography is so tight and so good, and you're so into it that I feel like for a lot of those scenes, if we added bombastic music on top of it, it would get in the way.
Was that scene, losing track here, was that scene actually longer at one point and you had to cut it down?
No, it was shorter and I had to lengthen it.
Okay, so how difficult is that when you have a very tightly constructed action sequence and then you've got to expand and contract that? Like, where do you begin to look for, all right, everything's lining up perfect, I got my beats working, and now somehow I have to make this, 20 seconds longer, 30 seconds shorter.
Yeah, I mean, there aren't a lot of opportunities in that particular scene to do that. But as I said, the snowball fight, because they shot a kind of a wide and a medium looking down that narrow hallway from one end and a wide and a medium looking down the same hallway from the other end, and repeated the choreography on both, and that was an opportunity to be like, well, nobody's going to really know, as long as the characters are roughly in the same position. If you're focusing on different people in the first time you repeat it versus the second, no one's really going to be able to track, that this is exactly the same choreography that you just saw. And then the rest of it is just like looking for frames, again, like looking for them, figuring out that they're in the hallway full of knives. I was finding the last possible frame that I could find before, between the previous move and before they turn their heads to look at the case, just to try to lengthen out, like make sure that you can see what they are looking at and what they're seeing over their opponent's shoulder.
Typically, do you prefer to have temp music to work with to find that rhythm, or do you just go straight up, I want to do the action, I want to feel it without any music, and then I'll just see what works later on?
Yeah, I generally, overall, don't cut with music unless it's a montage. And then I'll find something that I can kind of get a beat from, even though that's likely not going to be the thing that lives in there for the final. But for the most part, dialogue and action, I don't cut with music.
So Tara, you have some knives in your movie.
I have a few knives.
You have a lot of knives. This is a very stabby panel, I thought. Tell us about the clip that you brought today.
The clip I brought is from The Woman King. It is the beginning of the Oyo battle. What I would say, if you've seen the movie, you know where the Oyo battle is. But basically, the Oyo kingdom has decided to attack the Dahomey kingdom. but the Dahomey kingdom gets word that this is going to happen, and they kind of preempt the Oyo. So we're coming in at the dawn of that morning.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the Woman King. You don't need a reason, but why that sequence?
I like the sequence because it has it really is the calm before the storm in terms of building the fight itself. What I love about the Oyo battle is prior to the scene, you're learning a lot about each one of these characters and who they are, who they think they are as a warrior. We have Naniska, who's kind of head of the Ogoja women warriors, but she's also an aging warrior. She fights differently. Her second in command, Amenza, is more of a spiritual warrior. So a lot of times when you see her, you're not necessarily seeing, you're seeing her fight, but she fights in a different way. And what I love about this scene is that it's also a battle where each of these warriors is really discovering who they really are, and the audience is really discovering. For instance, Fumbe, who is the character that you see at the end, who almost gets taken out and then ultimately gets saved by Nawi, who's one of the leads. There's a certain point in the film where she says, I'm not a warrior. I mean, they all come to this moment in time, really discovering who they are as warriors. And actually, you see things that at the beginning of the movie, they weren't capable of, they weren't either capable of doing or had some degree of disdain. For instance, Nawi as a character, one of the first things that she's taught is the first weapon she's given is a rope. And she's like, why are you giving me a rope? And yet, by the time you get to the scene, you begin to see how she's learned to use the rope to save. So I think I love this scene because it was a fun scene to cut. It was an honor. Like, these women trained so hard, 6 months to get themselves in shape and into the physical space to be able to do what they did, and being able to choose when to allow those action moments to continue. And each one was kind of shot as its own vignette. So it was really about tying all of their stories into the overall battle. So there was a lot to kind of move around, but there was always, what I liked is that there was a lot of character storytelling. If you see the film from the beginning, you can tell that though we're moving through this fight scene, you are seeing a lot of character growth and development through what they're physically doing.
Yeah, I think before I'd asked about the either or of dialogue-driven or emotional scenes versus action, and the answer is really it can be both, and I think it's a great sequence that demonstrates it is both. Because of that, you mentioned the pretext, the learning about these characters and how it plays out in these vignettes, that it goes from Naniska and then to Lashana Lynch's character, and then I'm trying to remember the sequence, and then Nawi at the end. I mean, you said moving things around. Were you able to move things around, or was it important that those vignettes were in a certain order?
There were certain things that we moved around. There's a particular character that, this fight goes on for another like four or 5 minutes, but there is a particular character named Ode, whose character we kind of played around with, what happens to her character and when. But there was also kind of playing around with the trajectory of the fight, like when does the fight turn? Because at a certain point, you're seeing wins, you're seeing losses, but in a space where the Dahomey are outnumbered really, and in likelihood would have more difficulty winning this fight. At what point do you decide to show that change at the shift of the fight, and when the Dahomey kind of start to take over, and you realize, okay, they're going to get through this, not without casualties, but they're going to make it through.
Mike had said that he looks for what the intent of the scene is. How did that come through from Gina? Was it in the script? Was it in your discussions with her? If you looked at that script, does it say, okay, well, this is what I want you to accomplish, Terry, figure it out?
Well, it's funny when you talked about that, like you read the script and the line is, they fight, and it's like, 8 minutes. So, the script, of course, gives you a certain degree of what the idea is supposed to happen in the scene. But I have to laugh because often that happens. Like they make love and then it's like, a 6-minute scene or whatever that is. So this was no different. I think that this did not have previs, but what it did it did have a certain degree of a lot of stunt viz to kind of go for. And I didn't know when you talked about beat sheet, do most people know what a beat sheet is? Yes, no? Does it need to be explained?
Maybe.
No, maybe? Okay. Because often when you don't have that complete story within the script, it is the script supervisor who will physically write down, like, every beat that's supposed to happen. Like, okay, Nawi enters and saves Fumbe, and then, Nawi gets captured. All those kinds of things get, written down so that when you finally get your line script back, you can kind of get a sense of what happened on set because those things can change. So, I think with this, what it really was is I had, and this one didn't really have as much stunt viz, but I basically had a sense of what was supposed to go where. And I found that often, depending on who the character was and their ability and their agility with what particular action they were doing, Gina often, we kind of call Gina still rolling Gina, because often, when she's doing an action beat like that, she'll have them repeat it, okay, go back to one, and do it again. So within a take, I may have 4 or 5, times that they do it. And that's where the assistants are very helpful to me, because often I will have them just give me a back to back to back to back of a particular movement. And that really helps me start to kind of begin, because often when you're doing something like this too, you're not necessarily starting at the beginning. You may be starting at the end of the fight. You may be starting at the middle of the fight. Sometimes it has to do with, again, what are they shooting when? Sometimes first unit's only getting part of it and second unit's getting the other part of it. So I find it incredibly helpful to have those, we basically call them like, those just string outs of different things so that I can just decide to start somewhere. And, and then you just kind of, and sometimes I would get to a certain fight and only get it to a certain point and go, okay, I got to put this down, and then I'd start someplace else. And did I answer your question? I don't know.
I never know. So there was another clip that we talked about bringing from The Old Guard, which is a fight that takes place in a plane between two characters. And what's interesting to me about that scene is just the geography of it. And that's a topic we haven't discussed really in the action stuff so far, is managing the geography of an action sequence. And that as things get a little chaotic, you can lose track of things. And it's like, Evan, you were saying, how does Keanu get everywhere in this movie? Who cares? But in a sequence like that battle that we just watched, are you having to be cognizant of, this character is somewhat in the background having their fight, and the other characters in the foreground having the one that I'm paying attention to? Maybe in the moment in the first viewing, people are just sort of absorbed by the battle overall. But eventually people are going to, multiple viewings, you notice like, wait a minute, how can that character be there? They were just over here. Is that something that you worry about at all in a sequence like that? Or you just say, you know what, I'm just going off emotion and rhythm and we'll see what happens?
Not initially. And I feel like if you get too caught up in that initially, it can actually freeze you. You can get frozen in the minutia of something like that. And I think that, yes, of course, matching and making sure that continuity things are there. But I do find myself just wanting to kind of get it down first and then watch it. And then I try to be an audience to my own film, in the sense of, am I seeing these things? And then, obviously if, you're showing it to other people. So it's like there's an awareness of it. But again, it's like, how much can you get away with? It's like shiny object over here, look over here, right? And that's really what we're doing. We're directing the eye. And hopefully, you know, in the process, those types of things can get, you know, passed at least the first or second time you see it. Maybe by the fifth or sixth, yeah, you got us, you caught us, but, you know.
What about that?
But when you talk about close proximity, like the plane, like I'm looking at, you're literally, and I love that set, by the way. It's like you're literally in a hallway doing something like that. And the plane fight was very similar. It's like those kind of closed spaces even kind of make it more fun to kind of, you know, figure those out. Because, yeah, you can only go so far in a plane.
So
you know.
score plays pretty heavily in that sequence.
Yeah.
Did you work with any temp score at all, or what is your process like with the composer?
When I first started that scene, no. But at a certain point, when I have it kind of down, and I'm now again modulating and looking at the dynamics of the overall thing, I will definitely, you know, I like listening to music. Sometimes I just like listening to music just to get me in the mood to cut a scene, you know, just kind of get a certain energy going. I found that with The Woman King, it was the hardest film I've ever done to temp, just because there wasn't there wasn't, and there's great scores out there, but there wasn't anything that really, I don't know, was speaking to me in the rhythmic way that I would have heard this, you know. So I did end up, you know, finding a couple things to temp, but we were very fortunate where we knew that Terrence was going to do the score even before a frame was shot. So it was helpful to bring him in and let him kind of take a look at it so we could get something from him earlier than, but that didn't mean that we necessarily showed it to the studio earlier. I mean, that's the thing also when you do have the composer come in early to kind of help you and give you kind of things to work with, you have to be careful because they're still in their process and you don't want to present anything to the studio that they're not ready for them to hear either. So it's kind of this thing where, yes, I'm working with temp, I'm also working with Terrence's, you know, early kind of, you know, pieces that he's starting to put together, but just, you know, being very careful about how it's, and when it's shown with that.
Well, it should come as no surprise to anybody that a panel about action editing would go by way too fast. We are out of time. Sorry about the questions from the audience, but that didn't happen. But these people are all very approachable, with the exception of Mike. So if you have any questions, you know, hit them up. I'm sure they'd love to talk to you. This was a lot of fun. I knew it would be. You guys did a great job. And I'd like all of you to join me in thanking our guests today for doing this incredible panel.